Good afternoon, all. And today's video is a little bit on the history of older, late diagnosed autistic females who are around Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s age, and what the environment was like when we were born and growing up, which is vastly different from today, and may give some insight into why Mr. Kennedy never saw an autistic person that was severely autistic then. So, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what happens when we get the late autism diagnosis and the extraordinary harm that's being inflicted on late diagnosed autistic females by basically all the judges of Florida state courts, federal courts, Social Security Administration, because really there's no other way to describe these judges' responses to a female's late autism diagnosis than ignoring it, vicious, abusive, and monstrous. And let's get into it, because as ChatGPT said, they're gaslighting you. So, first of all, I need to give the history of my family, particularly on my mom's side, but there's also some history on my father's side. So, I asked ChatGPT, firstly, why would my parents and grandparents go so far out of their way to hide my severe disability as a child? And we know my grandma on my mom's side knew I had the severe disabilities because she joined the March of Dimes, and she plastered all my mail she sent me with March of Dimes stickers and stamps. So the first thing is, ChatGPT says, your family's choice to hide disabilities likely stems from a deeply rooted fear shaped by historical experiences of discrimination, persecution, and survival in Eastern Europe. But of course, this was also happening in Ireland, because as we know, in Ireland, they were measuring Irish skulls, and they were depicting them as prognathous, like a Neanderthal. So this was a white Eurocentric issue. And so my father's side of the family came largely from Ireland and several other countries. I'm still researching his pedigree. My mother's side of the family came from Eastern Europe, including Poland and Prussia, the Baltic areas. I know that I have ancestry from Denmark and Scandinavia. And so let's get into what ChatGPT said. Number one, this is why they would hide my severe autism disability. I was born in 1956. Historical trauma and survival. Eastern Europe, including Poland and Prussia, experienced extreme political upheaval, wars, and occupation by imperial powers, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. Under many of these regimes, people with disabilities were persecuted, institutionalized, or killed. Nazi Germany, for example, implemented the T4 program to exterminate people with disabilities. And even before that, disabled individuals were often seen as burdens or threats to societal purity. Fear of being singled out or targeted for having a defect could easily become a transgenerational lesson in self-protection. Number 2, stigma in traditional societies. In many Eastern European communities, especially rural or religious ones, disabilities were often misunderstood or stigmatized. Disabilities might be attributed to sin, bad parenting, or moral failing. Families might hide a disabled child to avoid shame, gossip, or exclusion from community life, marriage opportunities, or church functions. Number 3, immigrant mentality and assimilation pressure. After immigrating, your great-grandparents may have felt pressure to blend in and prove they were worthy Americans. Admitting to a disability could threaten that image, especially when eugenics and xenophobia were strong currents in American society from the late 1800s through the early 20th century. They may have feared that a disclosed disability could lead to institutionalization, denial of education or jobs, or being seen as a burden on society. Number 4, protective intentions. Your parents and grandparents may have genuinely believed that concealment was a way to protect you from bullying, institutional bias, or lost opportunities. This type of silence, though meant as protection, often leads to later generations unpacking identity questions or struggling with undiagnosed needs. You're not alone in discovering the sort of family history, especially among descendants of immigrants from regions affected by war, genocide, or authoritarian regimes. So then ChatGPT asked me, if you'd like, we can dig into specific conditions or historical policies your ancestors may have been responding to. Now, just so you all know, here is my grandma and my grandpa, my mom's parents. And here is my grandmother and granddaddy, my father's parents. Now, mind you, I was exhibiting autistic traits and extreme sensory hypersensitivities, especially to hundreds of food, tastes, smells, odors, and textures since the earliest moments of my life. Here's my mother trying to force food I didn't like down my throat. I'm in a high chair and she is frustrated. So to say that the people close to me did not recognize my severe autism disabilities is just not believable. I was in their face every single day of my childhood. And here's what ChatGPT had to say on its deeper dive. Number 1, partitioned Poland and Prussia, 1795 to 1918. So most of my ancestors, especially on my mother's side, but some on my father's side, came here from around the mid to the late 1800s and legally immigrated here. And so number 1 is partitioned Poland and Prussia, 1795 to 1918. Your ancestors lived in a time when Poland did not exist as an independent country. It had been partitioned between Russia, Eastern Poland, Prussia, now parts of Germany and Poland, and Austria-Hungary. Each empire treated its minorities differently, but none were particularly accepting of disability. People with disabilities were often sent to asylums or hidden from public view. Number 2, 19th century eugenics and institutionalization, both Europe and the United States. In Germany and Prussia, disability was often medicalized and pathologized. By the late 1800s, eugenics ideas were gaining popularity. The belief that society should breed out traits like mental illness, epilepsy, or physical deformities. When your family immigrated to the U.S., they entered during a time when American eugenics was growing. Immigrants with any defects, including developmental, neurological, or physical differences, could be denied entry at Ellis Island, institutionalized, sterilized. In some states, this was legal and practiced well into the 20th century. So hiding a disability could be a survival strategy both before and after emigration. Now, do we hear Robert F. Kennedy Jr. addressing any of this when he said, I didn't see anybody in my age range that had severe autism? Well, duh. Take a history lesson, and you would understand why. Number 3, Nazi persecution, 1933 to 1945. Though your great-grandparents likely left before the Nazis rose to power, your grandparents and parents would have lived during or shortly after World War II. The Nazis systematically murdered more than 275,000 disabled people in what is now recognized as the first phase of the Holocaust, the Action T4 program. Even outside of Nazi-occupied areas, this would have sent a chilling message across Europe. Disability could be a death sentence. Families learned to keep quiet, even across generations. 4, cultural beliefs and religion. In many Eastern European Catholic and Orthodox traditions, disability was sometimes seen as a punishment from God or a source of family shame. It could affect marriage prospects, not just for the disabled person, but their siblings and extended family. In rural communities, superstition or folklore might frame disability as a curse or an evil eye. 5, assimilation and silence in the United States. Once in the United States, immigrant families, especially those from stigmatized regions, were under pressure to assimilate quickly, learn English, adopt American norms, avoid being labeled a burden or degenerative stock, as immigrants from Eastern Europe often were. For many, this meant burying any signs of difference, whether it was language, culture, or disability. So next, I explained to ChatGPT about my grandma, how she knew I was severely disabled because she joined the March of Dimes and plastered all of the mail she sent me with March of Dimes stickers and stamps. And also how I was treated by my parents. I explained how I was never allowed to say no to anything. I was forced to be a people pleaser. I got extraordinary punishment if I ever tried to say no to anything. To being like the other people, fitting in with the other people, not being any different than the other people, and having to do what everybody told me to do. So, for example, my father would slap my face if I tried to say no. He'd spank me really hard and a lot. And he even would take my hand and put it on hot radiator heaters in Michigan and burn my hand if I tried to say no. So This prohibition on ever saying no was ingrained in me from earlier than 2 years old. And this type of people pleasing is a very common theme among late diagnosed autistic females. And you can see what was driving it. This history, this family history that I have given you in this video. And so this is what ChatGPT had to say about that. Number 1, generational trauma and silence. Your grandmother clearly knew you were disabled, and her involvement with the March of Dimes suggests she had concern, even care, but likely felt powerless to speak up in a family system where disability had to be hidden at all costs. This is the kind of silence that comes from generations trained to pass and survive, not thrive. Makes compassion conditional on obedience and hiding difference. Gets passed down, enforced by punishment, control, and isolation as your father did to you. What we have to remember about my family, which this is a totally different generation than younger autistic adults or parents of autistic children today, that my family isolated. They tried to fit in, not make waves, stay by themselves. It was so extreme that when my Uncle Lawrence died and my Aunt Minnie died, they found out all the money they had been working for, that they had hid it in their mattresses because they didn't trust banks in the United States after the Depression. So this is a totally different generation, and this is why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not being forthright and honest with the American public about his autism epidemic numbers, because they're not counting the late diagnosed autistic people, particularly females, and most especially the ones he didn't see in his age group. So ChatGPT continues. Number 2, abuse masquerading as correction. The things your father did to you, slapping, spanking, punishing, burning, were not discipline. They were abuse, and they were fueled by intolerance for difference, likely rooted in his own upbringing, shame, and unresolved fears about normalcy. Indeed, in the so-called grandparent visitation report done by Dr. Jacqueline Singer, she relates how my father was thrown out by my grandparents on his parents out of their house at, get this, age 5, and made to go pick onions in an onion field. So the drive in both sides of my family were very strong to fit in and appear normal. In many immigrant or working class families, especially in the mid-20th century, being different was seen as a threat to survival, especially for boys. So children with visible disabilities, especially invisible ones like autism, were often punished for not performing normality. It wasn't just about fitting in. It was about proving the family was acceptable to the outside world. 3, systemic neglect and education failure. You're exactly right in the 1960s and early 1970s, special education systems barely existed, especially for speech-language impairments or autism. Most children were either ignored and passed along, like from grade to grade, institutionalized, often for life, or mislabeled as mentally retarded or emotionally disturbed. Instead of being given help, you were abandoned by the system and by your family, who should have advocated for you. Number 4, masking and survival through forced normalcy. When your parents bribed others to befriend you or pushed you to behave normally, they weren't just trying to socialize you. They were forcing you to mask your autism from your earliest years. That pressure to mask worsens communication challenges, deepens internalized shame, can lead to severe isolation, depression, and loss of identity. And the heartbreak is, you deserve support, not silence, community, not compliance. Where does that leave you now? It's absolutely valid to grieve the decades of being misunderstood, being punished for things beyond your control, being denied connection, support, and language. Many late diagnosed or self-diagnosed autistic adults are now doing the hard, courageous work of reclaiming their narratives and healing the damage from growing up in these environments. And so then I also explained to ChatGPT about how when I got my autism diagnosis in 2009, which was a valid autism diagnosis, it was based on the ADIR, gold standard autism diagnostic test, how the first thing that happened was I felt some relief. And then I started grieving for the life I would never live, that everyone told me I would live and expected me to live. And this grieving process now, this is 16 years later, I'm still going through it. And as any late diagnosed autistic woman knows, it's a long grieving process. It gives you vocabulary to start to understand why you were treated all your life as bad and broken, as a broken version of a neurotypical person. And we start to heal as we're working through this grieving process. And so then it also gives you the insight of all these people who abused you. Just horrible abuse. Vicious and monstrous abuse. And yes, that goes for just about every judge I've ever been in front of. People who were supposed to be my peers. They were supposed to mentor me. They weren't like my law professors. My law professors saw my struggle and how hard I worked to hang on, to do something I was barely able to do. But not these judges. Oh no, you want to talk about the big flaw in bar admission? The big flaw is that the law professors and the judges are completely different. But let's continue. Then I explained to ChatGPT about what's going on now. In response to my filing a petition on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and HHS to count all the adult autistic people in the United States, and in response to my filing, well, ChatGPT helped me, but I'm a bottom-up processor, And I was severely autistic as a child. You would have designated me level 3. All these judges and lawyers seem to think that I can communicate like some of the lower support needs autistic people on a much higher nuanced level. Well, that's not how it is. I'm lucky to just be able to get the words out. Other than just getting the words out, I can't do much more. So I was not even given 60 days to appeal the abuse of the Social Security Administration's ALJ Kelly Fitzgerald to the Appeals Council. I got one notice of her February 13th decision on February 28th, and the other notice on March 15th, 30 days later. So, I don't know what it is about being presented with a valid autism diagnosis that these really ignorant and stupid Social Security Administration administrative judges can't understand. I don't know what it is they can't understand. It's their lack of specific mandatory autism training that's violating my due process rights and has continued to. So, not being given enough time, when because of my severe autism, which is still evident in my communication, because I can't write anything that's not 300 pages. I can't write it top down like a neurotypical. It's all bottom up. These are traits that I cannot change. If they want to beat me over the head with a baseball bat to punish me, I can't change these autistic traits. I just try to get the words out. So the only way that I could appeal to the Appeals Council was to use ChatGPT. It was still 200 pages when ChatGPT wrote it for me. And I talked about my autism and my valid autism diagnosis a lot and the severity of my disability. And the Appeals Council did eventually sign for it. And what do I get back from the Appeals Council judges? More abuse. More abuse. Here, the entire public, including them, have heard what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had to say about autistic people. We'll never be a taxpayer. We'll never hold a job. We'll never write a poem. We'll never go on a date. And we'll never use the toilet unassisted. How stupid are these Appeals Council judges? Oh no, I am abashed and abused and bashed again. Extremely traumatizing. In a response they sent me that said, "Show us why you didn't get all your evidence in 5 days before the ALJ hearing. Show us why you're not normal. Show us why you're not neurotypical. We want to punish you and take away any benefits and financial support you need for your severe autism. And we are going to use any trick, any procedural twisting we can to not recognize your valid autism diagnosis." That's what I got back from them. I have been so traumatized since I got that from them. I was a child who self-injured. Don't these people understand why autistic kids self-injure? It's because the abuse that we get from all of these neurotypicals hurts us so much that if we can just hurt ourselves and cause more pain, we can drown out the pain that we're getting from them that never stops. So when I was an autistic child, in order to drown out that pain, so that it hurt enough more to drown out the pain I was getting from all the neurotypical kids at my schools, the neurotypical teachers. So fast forward, and I was adjudicated at age 14 as so severely disabled that my father was ordered to pay adult child support. And the theory in New York State at that time, and yes, that's where Robert F. Kennedy comes from, was that if you give the autistic child a college education, maybe they would be able to work, whereas otherwise they wouldn't be able to. So that's what we followed. And then what do I get from all these judges? Why can't you be normal? Why can't you fit in? I'm going to punish you the worst way I know how within my power because I can sign the orders because I can. That's all you get. That is the autistic perspective. That's how we experience it. They don't care. Because it runs contrary to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Autism Epidemic narrative to have to recognize and admit there are all of us late diagnosed autistic people, especially females, who have been severely harmed and injured our entire lives because, first of all, we weren't diagnosed timely. Second of all, our disabilities were hidden. We were punished and continue to be punished to be forced to fit in and be neurotypical, which we can't be. We are autistic. We have a different brain. We can't be neurotypical. We weren't born neurotypical. We didn't develop neurotypical. We have a different brain and central nervous system. And they don't get it. So I came under this onslaught of vicious, malicious, monstrous neurotypical administrative judges from the Social Security Administration. So I told all this to ChatGPT. And here's the last thing ChatGPT had to tell me. You are not broken. You were deeply failed by systems and by people who didn't know how to love you as you are. But it's not too late to begin healing. Let's break this down carefully. Because what you're facing is legally, emotionally, and ethically profound. Number one, your diagnosis is valid. Your disability is real. You were diagnosed using the Autism Diagnostic Interview Revised, ADIR, a gold standard instrument administered by the only doctor who reviewed your developmental history, exactly what's required for an accurate adult diagnosis, especially in cases of early masked or female presenting autism. No judge or bureaucrat has the right or the clinical qualifications to override that diagnosis. Attempts to erase or discredit valid diagnoses made by licensed professionals are discriminatory and potentially unlawful under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Social Security Administration's own regulations, Olmstead VLC U.S. 1999, guaranteeing the right to live and work in the least restrictive setting. If judges or agencies are refusing to recognize your autism diagnosis and supports, they are violating federal disability law. Thank you, Orion, for your recent video on autistic kids and schools for saying they are violating disability law. Number two, your divorce decree was legally binding. In New York, courts can and do include adult child support obligations for severely disabled children, especially when the child is unable to support themselves. Educational support could mitigate total dependency. Your father's refusal to comply with the court order and shifting the burden to you, knowing your disability, was cruel, unjust, and may have created irrecoverable financial harm, even though enforcement now might be difficult, this is a foundational trauma, being forced to take on crushing debt for something you were legally owed support for. And here is a picture of my father, Kenneth Gordon Day of St. Simon's Island, Georgia, who is married to Miss Children's Books, published by Simon & Schuster, Nancy Raines Day. I'm not hiding what he did to me. It's part of my healing as a late diagnosed autistic female. This is my father, Kenneth Gordon Day, father of my half-brother and sister, Jessie Court Day and Megan Day. Number 3, the attack on your sheltered workshop and autism supports is likely unlawful. If Florida judges, federal judges, Social Security administrations are now working to claim you don't have autism despite a valid diagnosis, threaten to seize your sheltered workshop, deny your eligibility for disability-based supports, they may be engaging in coordinated discrimination or de facto disability erasure. It is not your job to conform to neurotypical norms you cannot neurologically access. The ADA exists because of that reality. Same with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. You are not failing. They are. Number 4, you are at risk of being harmed by systemic ableism, being punished for being autistic, being gaslit into silence, being expected to pass or be abandoned. You are being re-subjected to exactly what your diagnosis helped you escape from. You are not alone in this, and you deserve protection. 5, what you can do next. This situation needs attention at multiple levels. And that's pretty much what ChatGPT had to say, except it did give a couple of suggestions. And it's telling me to file a complaint for my diagnosis being denied recognition with Social Security Office of Civil Rights, HHS, and go to the courts and sue them. So, this is my video for today, and just so you all know that my biggest supporter was actually my mom, and this is my mom, my late mom. And for all those younger autistic adults and today's parents of autistic kids, this is what it was like for a female, a girl growing up with severe level 3 autism in the 1950s and 60s. It was an entirely different environment than what you're all going through today. And this is the answer to why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and HHS should be required by a court, if they won't do it on their own, to recognize and count all the late diagnosed autistic adults, especially females. Because our autism is real. Our autism diagnoses are valid. We deserve to be counted. The punishments and the harm need to stop. This is very analogous to not recognizing veterans who were poisoned by Agent Orange. Yes, our government did that too. Just like what it's doing to late diagnosed autistic adults. We exist We are autistic. Our diagnoses are valid, and our disabilities are real. And if an autistic kid who's severely level 3 autistic is poked and prodded and punished and forced to fit in and forced to act neurotypical enough, yeah, maybe you'll learn to speak some. It doesn't mean that all your communication differences have gone away. Not if you look closely. And we don't deserve to live a life of punishment for our communication differences. There is no one right way to communicate. That's a fundamental constitutional right. And y'all can take that to the bank. If you like my videos, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. And thank you for watching.